All right, Jesse on Fire, welcome back to the channel. Now, we are going to talk about the Francis and Cyril fight because this just became the biggest fight in the history of the UFC. And that is because we now know the full details of Francis's contract, and it's a big game changer. Now, we could say that the contract details leaked, or we could say that Francis just directly said them in his interview with Brett Okamoto. So he did an interview a few days ago. It got posted last night. And if you've been listening to my channel, I've obviously covered this extensively. But the big issue, if you really understand the landscape, if all the information that I had shared, if you had kind of, processed it, the big sticking point about what his real leverage position was, because obviously, let me actually rewind. Everybody knows this is the last fight on his contract, right? Everybody knows that. The leverage point was the champ clause. It's like, okay, well, if he loses to Cyril, he's a free agent, but he's coming off a loss. So how valuable is he? Okay. If he wins, that's the last fight on his deal, but the champ clause kicks in. Okay. So he's got another year. Dana alluded to that he had another fight. And so in reality, if that was the case, that he had another fight, his leverage position would not be very strong at all, actually. Like if he had to do another fight, he's not really in a very strong position at all. And it turns out that he doesn't have to do another fight. And he revealed that on the interview last night. So public knowledge now, what the real details of the contract are. Okay, so I'll tell you exactly what that is, and I'll explain why that changes the dynamic of this fight so extensively when it comes to the fight business, because this is a complete game changer. Now, before I get into it, if you like the content, subscribe and ring the bell. Tell all of your friends. Like I said, I have covered this extensively on this channel. If you think that you've heard all the details about this, you haven't, because I definitely 100% have never talked about this on the channel. Francis talked about it last night. Now it's public knowledge, so we're going to talk about it too. Yeah, so let's discuss it. So what he said last night is the contract detail that, for all intents and purposes, nullifies the champ clause, okay? So when you're thinking through a contract, no, actually, let me rewind. So the reason why the champ clause and whether or not he had another fight is so important is because his leverage comes from if he has the ability to go outside the UFC with no interference from the UFC and no involvement from them unless he decides to include them and do a fight external of the UFC. Now, there's no like question what that fight is. Tyson Fury literally said again today that he wants Francis. He said it'd be a battle of the Titans. Okay. So any of these people who've been thinking that like this is like a pipe dream, oh yeah, like the Tyson Fury thing would never actually happen, then you clearly are a rookie in this fight business and have not ever paid attention to how this happens. Did anyone in a million years think that Conor McGregor was going to be able to talk his way into a Mayweather fight? Of course not, right? But this is how it happens. Okay. Someone with a lot of influence calls for a fight. The other person responds and they fight. There's a lot of business to do in between, but the business gets done because everyone's going to make a lot of money. And Tyson Fury is obviously the A side on this, right? Now, he can't do a fight like this without Francis. So it's not like he's not doing Francis a favor, like there is a very mutually beneficial situation. But Francis, if Francis does a boxing match with Deontay Wilder, that doesn't sell like the Tyson Fury one. It'd be close, but the Tyson Fury one, that's a whole different universe. You get Tyson Fury against Francis, especially in mixed rules. And Tyson wants it, and he's making that very clear. So that's the deal, is can Francis actually make this fight? Can he both win and have this be the last fight on his contract? Because the way that the UFC made it sound publicly was that he couldn't, right? And I'm going to connect all of this back to who his manager is and why that matters, right? So what Francis revealed in the interview was that there is a clause in his contract that says it's 8 fights, and even with all of the extensions, because the UFC has all these extensions they can put in place. Like, that's crazy stuff, man. Like I've heard that if any time that a fighter goes and does like one of these grappling matches, they're allowed to do those, but it tacks on 6 months on the back of their contract or something like that. And if someone gets injured or they retire, like that just freezes your contract in time. I'm retired. Okay, well, so you want to sit on the bench for 2 years? You still owe us the 3 more fights, and the 3 years you have left is frozen. Like, you can't retire and run the clock out. It just freezes it in time. Now, I think there are some kind of limitations to that, but anyway, it is what it is. But in Francis's contract, even with all of the extensions, the maximum amount of time that it could last is 5 years. And he is going to be through 5 years, December of 2022. So of this year. Okay? So what that means is, even if he wins, champ clause kicks in, he can turn down the fights. He can just say, no, I'm not going to fight. Well, we've got a fight for you. Well, I'm not going to take it. Because that one clause supersedes all others, which is that he's fought all the fights, and the contract cannot exceed 5 years no matter what. And so you get to 5 years, it's over, regardless of whether he turns down the fights. Because normally, if you turn down a fight, it tacks on time, it extends you. And UFC does that to protect themselves, so that people can't just oh no, I'm not going to fight, not going to fight, not going to fight, and then all of a sudden they're out of their contract. Now that's reasonable for them to have, as long as there's a time limit, and there's a time limit on Francis's. And so at the end of this year, even if he wins, he's done. And so he's not going to fight for the UFC again unless they give him a vastly improved contract, and it sounds like including a boxing match. And this is what I think is going on. Okay, so that changes his leverage position completely. Now, this is exactly what I think is going on, okay? So when I watched that and I thought about it, I went, I think I know what the UFC is doing. I think the UFC is in wait and see mode. I think they're just in wait and see mode. Because here's the thing. He's fighting Ciryl Gane, right? He's fighting Ciryl Gane. If he wins, how valuable is he? Enormously valuable. Enormously valuable. If he loses, how valuable is he? Not as valuable, right? Now, why would you offer him some enormous contract to retain him if there's a possibility that he loses this fight and then becomes much less valuable? I think they're in a wait and see, because they know they're going to have a year, almost, not a year, but I don't know, whatever, 10 months to work out a negotiation with him if he wins. They've got 10 months where he can't sign with anyone else. That's a long time. So I think they're just in wait and see mode. I think they're just going to see what happens. I think if Francis wins, you are going to see a UFC that is very motivated to get a deal done. Because here's the thing. The reason why this represents what could be the most important fight in UFC history is because if they don't get a deal done with Francis, if they fail to get a deal done, and Francis made every indication that he wants to do a deal with the UFC. I mean, he made that very clear. He's saying, I want money, I want to be able to box, and I want the UFC to partner with me and help co-promote. And that's exactly what he should do. Make sure that he's being fairly compensated, since he has the option to do without them. At this point, you got to think about it like that. If he asks for $25 million for the boxing match, people go, $25 million? That's crazy. Why is he being so greedy? Huh? He's doing them a favor. He's doing them a favor. Honestly, if he does, and I don't even think he should. I'm talking like a base level 25 minimum, because he's allowing them in on what is going to be a blockbuster fight. That only makes sense if bringing them in is going to make him more money, right? So he has to balance what their percentage would be against what promotional value they can bring to the table. And so 25, I would say 25 would be the absolute bare minimum you're even talking about in a Tyson Fury fight. But there's plenty of room for UFC to make plenty of money and also retain their heavyweight champion, because that's the thing. If they don't do the deal, Francis goes and he does a deal with Tyson Fury's people, they promote it, Tyson goes and makes $60-70 million. That's a total game changer for how UFC fighters think about their own career. They'll all start lots of them start trying to fight out their contracts, the big stars. But yeah, so that's why. That's what the situation is. Now, he's got to fight Ciryl Gane. Ciryl Gane is a monster. He's by far the hardest guy that he's ever fought. But But that's my guess. I think they're just going to wait and see. And if Francis wins, then I think that they'll end up doing a really, really favorable deal with Francis because they're going to want to keep him, but they're going to have to pay because he has. You don't have him locked in now. Like you have to make a deal that makes sense for him. And you're negotiating against him going with CAA to go promote. Oh, and then the thing I was talking about with who his manager is. So if what Francis is hanging his hat on is the 5-year limit on the contract, I would imagine that there's a possibility that the UFC might want to litigate that, right? Like they're like, no, this says very clearly that this extends, anytime you turn down a fight, it extends it however many months, right? And they could try to say that supersedes the 5 years thing. But I would bet my life, if Francis said that in an interview, that's coming from Markel at CAA with CAA attorneys who have reviewed it, which means that is what it is. Francis wouldn't have said that publicly if it wasn't. And I actually, but the difference between having someone like Markel, or just not even necessarily Markel, just someone at a firm like CAA representing you versus like, I don't know, some like kind of small time random independent is like, if the UFC sues you, what are you going to do? You're just going to end up giving in to them because you don't have the money to defend the case. Nope, we think you still have another fight. And you're like, no, I don't. They're all, well, we'll take you to court. And then you're like, wait, what? And it's going to cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars to defend it. And your manager doesn't have money to do that. You know what I mean? And so CAA, it's like, oh, okay. You sure you want to do that? Because what we'll do is we'll countersue you and we'll try to dig into, we'll say that your contracts are illegal. We'll say that what you're doing is illegal, that you're calling them independent contractors, but blah, blah, blah. And what we're going to do is we're basically going to rip open this scab that you've had over how you do business with the fighters. And so is it really worth it to you? You sure you want to take him to court? You positive about that? Because you got a lot more to lose than he does. I mean, he's, you're not going to be able to lock him up forever. He's still going to get paid. We could literally change, we could change the landscape of how you make money forever if you open this Pandora's box. I mean, if I was the UFC, I wouldn't want anybody digging into how we contract. I don't want some, legal body deciding whether things that are standard practice for us are legal or not, Because there's gray area. I mean, look, like, obviously, I know Hunter's their head legal guy. I would assume he's an incredible lawyer. But he would tell you the same thing. You go to court, and what the court decides is what it is. And it's all up to interpretation, So, anyway, that is what I've got. I will be at UFC 270 in section 108 with my lady. So, if you guys are at the show, you want to say what's up, that's where I'll be. Anyway, love you guys. Peace.